What I wanted to do today is kind of give you a snapshot through my lens, my filter, which is business. I grew up, spent 4 decades in the banking business, as Joe mentioned, and kind of share with you where we've been, where we are today, but where this whole thing called ethics is going. So without further ado, let me get into this. So from a business standpoint, where have we been? I'm trained as an economist. When bubbles burst, economic bubbles burst, they expose rot. And beginning on October 16th, 2001, the biggest rot of all got exposed. Headline read across the country, Enron announces a $3 billion earnings restructuring. What that means is that somebody was cooking the books. And within a period of 5 weeks, Enron Corporation went out of business. Enron was the 7th largest company in the United States at the time. $63 billion in market capitalization was wiped out. They had 20,600 employees who had 62% of their pension assets tied up in their 401ks and Enron stock, which was going through a blackout period while they changed plan administrators. So their pensions were wiped out. This was like the granddaddy of all scandals. 5 weeks, Enron disappeared from the face of the earth. It never had a down quarter in its financial history. I mean, people were stunned by this. Mike Oxley, congressman, opened up hearings in December of 2001, began to study it, and while everybody's focused on Enron, a whole parade of other scandals came across the headlines. So we had Tyco. Anybody remember Tyco? Who was the poster child for Tyco? Anybody remember? You ever read the name Dennis Kozlowski? All right, Dennis Kozlowski used about $400 million of Tyco assets for his own personal use, buying condominiums, artwork, everything else. In fact, the famous thing that came up at his trial was the $2.5 million birthday party that he used shareholder money for his wife's birthday. The party was held in Sardinia. Does anybody remember what the theme of the party was? It was a Roman orgy. It was a toga party. This is showing videotapes during the trial of Dennis Kozlowski as we're going through this. They had an ice statue of David urinating vodka. You can't make this thing up. It was the picture of executive excess, okay? This got everybody's attention. But you had Tyco and Adelphia and Xerox Corporation and Martha Stewart, who went to jail, Imclone Corporation, Computer Associates, one of my favorites on this list. Very creative company. When they couldn't make their financial numbers in 30 days, they invented the 35-day month. They just took earnings from the next month and brought them back to this. I mean, this is insanity. What they've done, by the way, Computer Associates, so that you won't recognize this fraudulent name, they changed their name since then because they were embarrassed, obviously. They're now called CA. Like, that really disguises who they are and what they do. But this went on, and so finally we get out to, and Mike Oxley and Paul Sarbanes are talking about bringing a bill before the Congress in June of 2002 called Sarbanes-Oxley, as we now know it. But there was no appetite in the Congress for a Sarbanes-Oxley bill. The bill before the Congress in June of 2002 was the Homeland Security Bill. All right, people were still post 9/11, great trauma, great tension, and so forth. And a senator from New Jersey at the time, John Corzine, which is another name that we could go into with all sorts of scandalous backgrounds. John Corzine was heard to say on June 25th, 2002, it'll take another Enron-sized scandal before we even think about this bill. And of course, the next day, the headline read, WorldCom implodes, $173 billion bankruptcy, the largest bankruptcy in history. It eclipsed Enron within 6 months by a factor of 3. I mean, this was stunning. Bush flew up to New York. He gave a speech at the Millennium Hotel across from the footprint of the former site of the World Trade Center, and he called for a new ethic of responsibility and the swift passage of Sarbanes-Oxley. On July 25th, 3 weeks later, he signed Sarbanes-Oxley into law. The biggest piece of legislation coming down on business at that point in time. Now, that was fine for then, but we had a whole bunch of other scandals that were in the pipeline. Arthur Andersen lost its license to practice accounting. 88,000 people lost their jobs. They were part of the Big 8 at the time, and we're down to the Final 4, and that, by the way, is not NCAA basketball. We only have 4 remaining very large accounting firms that are going on right now. In my very first banking job, I was making loans to the partners of Arthur Andersen, 1970, so they could go back and buy additional partnership shares. It was secured by the capital of the firm. It was the easiest and safest loans I ever made in my life. If there was one word in 1970 that anybody would have used to describe Arthur Andersen, the word was integrity. They reeked of it. They had the highest standards in the profession. And if you had told me in 1970 that someday Arthur Andersen would go out of business because of obstruction of justice, it would be unthinkable. But here we are, years later, and this is what's been happening in the business world, so I won't bore you with the rest of that. Many people around the world said, we always knew you greedy Americans would get this, right? Well, it's not uniquely American. Royal Dutch Shell invented $1 trillion of reserves that didn't exist. Volkswagen took the heads of the Workers' Council, their unions if you will, on sex junkets around the world paid for by their shareholders. Parmalat is the Enron of Europe, quite frankly. They still can't find $9 billion of cash, which is probably buried in the Italian Alps someplace. So this is not a uniquely American experience as you go through this. We had major settlements that took place at that point in time. Hospital Corporation of America paid $1.7 billion. Tenet Healthcare, one of your California companies, paid $900 million. The list goes on, and in every one of these cases, there was a deferred prosecution agreement, which is an agreement between the Department of Justice and the firm, signed for 3, 5, 7 years, whatever it takes, that you will eliminate and mitigate all the risks that got you in trouble to begin with. And then they appoint a federal monitor to come in with an army of accountants and lawyers that can attend any meeting, every meeting, ask for any piece of evidence or information that they want or need during this period of time. I worked for a federal monitor in the early 1990s at Prudential Securities. They had a $2 billion scandal. And I was brought in to create the first ethics office on Wall Street. No organization ever wants a federal monitor to come in and be sitting in your face. I mean, it is not fun, and they're still doing it to this day. Alan Greenspan, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States, he used to give his sunshine testimony before the Congress. And Greenspan reminded me of Casey Stengel. Nobody knew what he was talking about, you know? He just, blah, 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 stuff would come out. But in one of his testimonies, he talked about the markets are acting with irrational exuberance. And now what Greenspan was trying to do was to send a signal to the markets that you're in a bubble, that you're in a bubble. Now, watch what happened during the 1990s. NASDAQ started the 1990s at 453. It peaked in March of 2000 at 5,132 before it fell to 1,100 in the summer of 2002. NASDAQ lost 80% of its value. Dow Jones Industrial Index started in the 1990s at 2883. It peaked at 11,750 in January of 2000 before it fell to 7,800 in the summer of 2002. $7 trillion of market capitalization was wiped out. Here's Greenspan. The year is 1997. The markets are acting with irrational exuberance. He's sending a signal that we're in a bubble. Dow Jones was trading at 6,600. So what did the markets do, the irrational markets? They doubled. They went to 11,700. I mean, he thought we were in a bubble at 6,600. And if anybody wants to turn the clock back to March of 2009, just a few short years ago, what were the markets trading at? 6,600. You know, the markets had peaked in 2007, late 2007 at 14,168, fell to 6,600 in March of 2009, and now we're back to the gravy train again, right? 15,000, Dow, isn't this great? Are we in a bubble? I don't know, we'll talk about that. But we had conflicts of interest, fraud, preferential treatment, failure of every gatekeeper that had a responsibility for good governance of any organization. So this was a very difficult period of time. We got Sarbanes-Oxley. I won't bore you with the details because it pertains to business, but it only spoke to 3 audiences. The accounting profession through the creation of the Public Accounting Corporation Oversight Board, PCAOB. It spoke to boards of directors, the governing authority. It spoke to senior executives. Sarbanes-Oxley was a bill about people at the top. The second one we got were the Thompson and McNulty memos. I'll speak to Larry Thompson memo. Larry was Deputy Attorney General of the United States, issues a memo to all U.S. attorneys across the country. Here's what you must consider before you prosecute a corporation. The seriousness of the offense, the pervasiveness of wrongdoing, the history of similar misconduct. There were about 8 or 9 elements. The pervasiveness, though, issue is important to us because pervasiveness gets to the issue of culture. They want to know that when there is some fraud or issue of malfeasance, is this a rogue employee or is this systemic? Is this part of the culture of the organization? And what we have learned over time, and this is an important message for us, is that mere compliance is inadequate. There's plenty of research, empirical research to support this. Compliance without ethics does not work. And so the emphasis, and what Washington was saying then and continues to say, and now governments around the world are saying, is you must take extra legal measures to build a culture of integrity in your organization. All right, we'll talk about more of this later as we go through this thing. So the Thompson memo was very important. And then the federal sentencing guidelines. Anybody familiar with the federal sentencing guidelines? All right, I don't want to take you through, yeah, Joe is obviously. I don't want to take you through too much detail. But on November 1st, 1991, the U.S. Sentencing Commission, which issues to the federal courts guidelines on the range of sentences for federal crimes, so that the same sentences are relatively meted out, East Coast, West Coast, North, South, male, female, white, black. That's what the Sentencing Commission is empowered to do. And it's only guidelines, by the way. It's not mandatory, but they try and measure how people do. On November 1st, 1991, they issued Chapter 8 of the Federal Sentencing Guidelines pertaining to crimes in the workplace. and it raised two new risks. Executives are now subject to civil and/or criminal charges when an employee of yours commits a crime in the workplace. Whether you knew about it, whether you contributed to that crime is irrelevant. Willful ignorance, willful blindness is not a defense. And in those instances, the organization may be held accountable and subject to mandatory fines up to $290 million. Now, and by the way, there's plenty of evidence of that. But the commission did something very creative in 1991. They said, if you institute effective ethics compliance programs in your organization, you can reduce, mitigate, or eliminate those risks. My organization was born 3 months later. It was a direct impact. We had 19 people at Bentley College, now Bentley University in Boston, Massachusetts. We were there for the National Conference on Business Ethics. 40 people showed up. 26 were academics. The academics left in the afternoon, and the rest of us are sitting around. So what do you do? Well, I was just appointed Vice President of Ethics. What do you do? I'm Vice President of Compliance. What do you do? I'm Vice President of Business Conduct. And then somebody asked the very important question. What do you really do? What the hell do I know? I was just appointed, you know. So what you do when you have 19 people sitting in a room that don't know what you're doing, you form an association. And so the Ethics Officer Association, now Ethics and Compliance Officer Association, was born. We grew from 19 original members to 500 members in early 2001. And then Enron, WorldCom, Sarbanes-Oxley, and 3 years later I had 1,000 members, and today I have 1,400 members in 6 continents, and we're about to explode because I've got another 1,000 people in the next 3 months that want to sign up. So we're literally on a global scale beginning to explode. So this is very important. Now, there was an amendment in 2004 that's important for us to know in this room as well. In November 1st, 2004, Congress changed the law again. Now, in addition to law compliance, you must have ethics standards and a corporate culture that embraces them. This is the government's recognition that this is what we need to do. We need to be emphasizing ethics and integrity in addition to meeting the spirit and letter of the law. We'll talk more about this. All right, where are we today? The bubble burst again. All right, we got into the Great Recession. How did we get there? Well, we had this extraordinary explosion in mortgage activity. And I'm in the banking business. That's where I grew up. I spent 4 decades. Post 9/11, we had economic trauma. People were afraid to spend, okay? We had our hands in our pockets and we were just scared out of our mind. And I was at the epicenter. My office was 2 blocks south of the Trade Center. I saw the second plane fly into the South Tower. I lost my brother and a couple of friends. It was personal, okay? But we had this paralysis that took place across the country. And so the Fed, in trying to stimulate economic activity, drops interest rates over a prolonged period of time down to 1%. Then the banking industry, in its infinite wisdom, completely drops their underwriting standards. And so what we wind up getting are things, we had teaser rates. Listen to the language. You want to hear ethics? Teaser rate. We will tease you into a mortgage. We will give you a mortgage for 1% interest for 3 years, after which it will revert to some other rate. So you can afford it at 1%, but when it reverts, you may not be able to. So we're teasing you. We had no documentation loans, so you didn't need documentation, which became widely known in the profession as liar's loans. So you need a mortgage for $1 million? Go ahead. Your net worth's $10 million? Just sign right here. Liar's loans. And then we had ninja loans. No job, no income, no assets. Anybody could get a mortgage, okay? And this was what was going on. And so we took people who were underqualified for some of the monies that we're lending out. We run them across the street to the rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch. They give it a AAA rated thing, and we bundle them in bonds of $1 million, and we sell these toxic assets all over the world. Well, we get to the end of 2007, and the teaser rates begin to expire. Delinquencies show up, a couple of foreclosures. I'm sitting on the board of 2 national banks at the time. So we have bonds in our portfolio, AAA rated, selling for 99 cents on the dollar, very appropriate pricing. All of a sudden, 91 cents, 88 cents. What the hell happened? What's happening in the market? The market for these assets is disappearing, is what's happening. We got into 2008, and that's when the whole roof really caved in. This was incredible. July 11th, IndyMac Bank. Chuck Schumer, my brilliant senator from New York, comes out of a confidential meeting in Washington, D.C. He announces IndyMac Bank is in trouble. Chuck, you don't do that. That night on the 6 o'clock news, there it is, a run on the bank. Thousands of depositors online. It looks like the Great Depression. The markets are getting really scared out of their minds. And then we get to September. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac become wards of the state. These 2 mortgage giants. The Fed, they cannot any longer survive. Fed takes them over. A week later, Lehman Brothers becomes the largest bankruptcy ever. $639 billion. The global markets are in absolute turmoil. They're frozen, they're paralyzed. At Lehman Brothers, we got Merrill Lynch gets sold to Bank of America the next day. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House at the time, convenes a meeting in her office on September 18th. She has the congressional leaders on one side and the regulators on the other. Hank Paulson, Secretary of the Treasury at the time, former CEO of Goldman Sachs, one of the brightest global financial figures in the world, stands and for 20 minutes tells the Congress, if you don't give us wartime powers, the entire global banking system will disappear in a week. People who attended that meeting said the air left the room. They've never been so scared in their lives. All right? People were absolutely frightened by this. After 20 minutes, Pelosi turns to Ben Bernanke, Chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States, who is the recognized world authority on global depressions. She said, Mr. Chairman, what do you think? He said, if you don't act today, there will be no economy tomorrow. Capitalism almost died 4.5 years ago, literally. That's how close we came. And Bernanke, by the way, has been heroic because he has liquefied central banks and large banks everywhere in the world. $7 trillion of money loaned out to prop up the banking system. We can talk about that offline later. So ultimately, Paulson, 3 days later, sends a 3-page memo to the Congress asking for $700 billion in TARP money, toxic asset repurchase, which later recapitalized. Hell, I would have sent him 5 pages and asked for a little more, but you know, this were wacky times. The markets were coming apart. This was really a very frightening time, very frightening time. So life goes on. A lot of banks in Europe get nationalized. Life continues. I love one headline I had, Russia discusses bailout of Iceland. Up until this point, I thought Iceland was a country. I didn't realize it was a hedge fund. You know, it was remarkable. Iceland took their sovereign wealth fund and were investing in these toxic assets. It bankrupted the country of Iceland. I mean, this is mind-boggling. You know, finally, as things calmed down a little bit in the spring of 2002, we started to look forward. Stimulus programs from the U.S., elsewhere, about $3 trillion in stimulus programs, try and kickstart this economy. These were really, really scary times. So Warren Buffett, the great American billionaire, has this wonderful expression, when the tide goes out, that's when you know who's swimming without bathing trunks. I love that. I mean, it's really, it's a good visual, you know, or maybe it isn't, I'm not sure. So what did we wind up getting? Bernie Madoff. Are you kidding me? We prosecuted 150 Ponzi schemes in the U.S. Outside the U.S., other governments prosecuted another 100 Ponzi schemes. But Bernard Madoff, a $65 billion Ponzi scheme, and the guy didn't trade a security for 13 years. How do you do this? This is unbelievable. So he goes to jail for 150 years, may he live so long. And a couple of years ago, to a magazine reporter who's being interviewed, he has a weekly visit with his therapist. And he says, I asked my therapist, am I a sociopath? No, Bernie, you're just a poor, misunderstood little boy. Are you kidding me? Somebody about a week after the Madoff scandal referred me to a book called The Sociopath Next Door. You'll love this. So I open up the book, I'm reading through it. Every page is about Bernie Madoff, not by name, but the description is describing what this sociopath is all about. And I'm thinking, how did somebody get a book out so quickly, right after, you know, this thing was disclosed? So I look at the front cover. It was written 10 years before. A world-renowned sociopathologist. And in her book, she says that 4% of the people in the world are sociopaths. We have learned that there's an ethical bell curve, okay? There's 4% of the people who have no conscience. That's what a sociopath is. There's another 5% of the people, I believe, this is not empirical research, who are Irish Catholics who are afraid of burning in hell for all eternity and will never do anything wrong, okay? I'm probably closer to that camp. And then there's everybody else in between. It's all of the rest of our 16,000 in between that we need to try and guide them to make better decisions and stay away from the worst decisions. And to understand that collectively we make better decisions than any one of us may do individually. And that there are resources available through Joe's office and elsewhere in the management scheme of this wonderful county that they can rely on and seek guidance to. So we need to do it. We need to understand that's what exists in our organizations, okay? Every organization everywhere in the world. This is for real. So Bernie Madoff teaches us. Here's another one I love, Satyam Computer. Heralded as the great outsourcing giant of India. You know, everybody from the US and the rest of the world outsourcing to Satyam Computer. I mean, great company. They had just won the Golden Peacock Award for being the best governed company in India. And then Ramalinga Raju went to the board of directors 3 years ago and said, well, I got to tell you a story. My brother and I invented 10,000 employees that don't exist and 400 companies that don't exist to siphon off $1 billion, put in our pocket. You know, way to go, Ramalinga. Nice going. Siemens became the poster child for global bribery and corruption. Siemens settled with US and German authorities for $1.6 billion, which could have been $2.7 billion had it not been for their extraordinary cooperation. They had roots with the Nazi regime during World War II. They were co-opted to produce arms. They either did that or they would have been killed. But nonetheless, post-World War II came to the immediate conclusion that the only way they could get the business was to pay for it. So they created a systematic approach to bribery and corruption worldwide. I mean, it was extraordinary. It was breathtaking. And what's interesting about Siemens, I gave a lot of pro bono counsel while they were under investigation, and they have since come back and now are the poster child for how to develop a full system of internal controls worldwide to address issues of ethics and compliance. But it cost them $100 million extra a month, $1.2 billion increase in their expense base to do this. And they really didn't believe that financially they could suffer the impact of this higher cost to their revenue stream. Turns out in 2010 they had record profits. And it taught everybody at Siemens that if you do the right thing, you can still win. I mean, so it was really a powerful lesson to an organization, very good organization too, by the way. The inside scoop on Rajaratnam and Gupta. So there's a gentleman that ran a hedge fund called the Galleon Group, Rajaratnam. I had dinner with him 8 years ago. Very fun guy. But obviously, and people would tell me, this guy's really important. He's worth $100 million. He's like I was supposed to do something, like money's falling out of his pocket. He became a billionaire over this. But it was all on inside information. He went to jail for 11.5 years. But he brought down with him Rajat Gupta, who was formerly the chief executive of McKinsey & Company, one of the most prestigious consulting firms in the world, who was also sitting on the board of directors, among other organizations, Goldman Sachs. And so here's this insider culture down in Wall Street. We'll talk more about them briefly. Goldman Sachs charged with fraud. So Goldman Sachs pleads no contest, neither admits nor denies guilt in a fraud, which too detailed to bore you with the details. We can talk about it later. But they pay $550 million to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The only person being prosecuted is this 30-year-old kid, Fabrice Touré, who was a lowly vice president at Goldman Sachs at the time. Now, emails are a prosecutor's best friend. So they got all these emails from the fabulous Fab, as he calls himself. And this one, I think, is particularly instructive. I love this because you have to listen to the words. So he's writing to his girlfriend. The whole world is about to collapse any time now. The only potential survivor, the fabulous Fab, as he calls himself. So he's already got a persona about himself, standing in the middle of all these complex, highly leveraged, exotic trades he created. Anyway, I'm not really feeling too guilty about this because the real purpose of my job is, and now he gives you the MBA stuff, is to make the capital markets more efficient and ultimately provide the US consumer with more efficient ways to leverage and finance himself. So there is indeed a humble, noble, and ethical reason for my job. And then he writes, it's amazing how good I am at convincing myself. This is somebody experiencing a schizophrenic crack-up. He has one set of values, comes to work in the morning, leaves those values at work, operates in a totally different culture. All right? Culture is the single biggest determination of behavior in every organization in the world. And then at the end of the day, he goes back and picks up and says, really, this guy's two different people. Banking business, forget about it. More scandals than you should shake a stick at. Wall Street's lost moral center. I was looking at this morning and I say, lost. They never found it. Wherever there is money, there is the potential for corruption. Wherever there is a lot of money, there is the potential for a lot of corruption. And Wall Street is the last place that will ever get it. I can assure you. When I got brought in by the Federal Monitor to Prudential Securities, I used to talk to the traders and the brokers and everybody else, and I'd get all done. They say, Darcy, what do you want? You want ethics or profits? I said, I want both. This is not an either-or proposition. I want the highest possible outcomes at the highest possible standards. This is not an either. In fact, we have plenty of research that says those companies that are values-driven actually build enduring great companies. We'll talk more about that later. Corruption. I wake up every morning at 4 o'clock in the morning. I devour news from all over the world. I read 12 daily newspapers from around the world. I get news feeds. I have a new speech every day. What a wonderful thing, I tell you. It's, but you go down this thing, and there's one that always stands out on this for me. In the middle, ex-Sinopec corporate chairman sentenced to death for bribery. Big energy company in China. And what's interesting in China, they do not have Sarbanes-Oxley. They just shoot the bastards. And what's amazing about it is, after he was executed, the next day, every employee came to work on time. It was like they got it, They understood what the message was here. I mean, this is just unbelievable. There's the other one that I love here. Greek condemned for falsifying data. First off, let's start off. Everybody in the world knows Greeks don't pay taxes. But Greece has been telling the European Union for years, we balanced our budget. Now, how do you balance a government budget if nobody's paying revenue into it, right? This is good. So finally, Greeks are condemned for falsifying data. But then you go down a few lines. How German companies bribed their way into Greek deals. Like, this is really hard. In Greece, corruption is a sport. You know, they go to the coffee shop and say, God, you'll never guess how I screwed the guy yesterday. Oh, man, I got a new one, you know. This is like a deal made in heaven, right? You know, the Germans love to bribe. The Greeks love to take bribes. What a great thing. I mean, it's just, you can't make this stuff up. It's crazy. And then you may wake up someday, as Walmart did a year ago, front page story, expose on Walmart in Mexico. And of course, once the feds come in to investigate, they're now investigating in India, China, South Africa, and everywhere else in the world. And we haven't heard what the outcome of this thing is. This is going to be a very significant story in the days ahead. And guess what? You are not immune from any of this, okay? And the lovely Bell, California, corruption on steroids. It's everywhere, okay? You know, one of the things when I travel around the world, I've got to make sure that I take a very measured and balanced approach, because I'm not preaching that America is this beautiful, wonderful fantasy land, you know, with rides from Walt Disney. We're as corrupt in many ways as the rest of the world. We've got to guard against that, protect against that. A lot of money passes through this county budget. A lot of money from the feds, the healthcare stuff and everything else. I mean, there are serious responsibilities to make sure that we comply with 157,000 healthcare laws at the federal level, and that we're doing what we're supposed to do. So we're not immune. In New York, of course, Andrew Cuomo, our governor, has a very significant anti-corruption effort going on, and it's worthy for all of us to continue to follow to see what the final passage of this is. He's negotiating the final details. He's really done a remarkable job as a governor in being able to do deals with the legislature there. Of course, the legislature they arrested their 7th state senator in the last 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, so the corruption is, and by the way, there's no place to hide anymore. We live in an age of information. In an age of information, there are no secrets. There is no place to hide. We can find out everything you've done. Everything you text, tweeted, did whatever, posted, is all subject to the light of day. I have a forensic expert that can find it in 5 minutes, okay? Which is why the headlines continue to show more and more corruption, because it's just surfacing what's been out there for a long time, all right? This is a very different world we live in today, in this age of information. And so we need to pay attention to that as we go forward. New risks for the 21st century, so let's kind of, where are we going? In the Dodd-Frank bill that was passed a 3 years ago, there is a provision in the governance section. Dodd-Frank, 90% is about the banking business, 10% is about governance, and within the governance section, there is something called the whistleblower bounty bill. So now, if somebody makes a referral to the Securities and Exchange Commission on a public corporation, that leads to an investigation and settlement in excess of $1 million, that person the SEC is required by law to pay that person between 10 and 30% of the final settlement. If you want to know what this is going to look like in a couple of years, some of the settlements that we had prior to this, but these are whistleblower settlements. Pfizer got whacked for off-label marketing of Bextra about 2.5 years ago. They paid $2.3 billion to settle up with the Department of Justice and Health and Human Services. In that, 6 whistleblowers split $102 million. In the Novartis case, 2 whistleblowers each got $20 million. In the GSK case for $750 million, 1 whistleblower, former director of quality, got $96 million. The SEC used to get 2 to 3 referrals a month, and not quality referrals. When they instituted this program, they got 3,000 referrals in the first year. That was as of September 30. They can't keep up with it. They've got a unit to triage these things. I mean, this is really extra. So this is becoming a perfectly transparent world. My members are not happy about this because we've spent 22 years trying to build helplines, get people to speak up internally so we can deal with issues internally. And the issue that we have with that is if we don't respond quickly, efficiently, people get nervous. Then they go outside. We know statistically that 95% of people who blow the whistle external to our organizations come internal first. But it's not fun being a whistleblower. Every whistleblower I've ever spoken to has regretted that they did it, has regretted, because they go through a living hell. Yeah, you may get some big payoff someday, maybe, but it's a living hell. Once you blow the whistle and you're, of course, assured no retaliation and perfect confidentiality, but then you walk around the hallways looking to see who's looking at you funny. And even if we don't even know, but you read everybody else's faces into something and you can't sleep at night, I mean, you become paranoid. a very, very difficult situation. So this is significant, this whole issue of whistleblower. We now have apps that you can download, BribeSpot, that you can report whistleblowing. Transparency International around the world has set up websites for this. China has websites, and they're not trying to catch Chinese nationals, they're trying to catch us. But I mean, it's such a transparent world, it's not hard to blow the whistle. And so it's going to become increasingly useful. Hacking is significant, and of course News Corp over in London is the poster child for the hacking scandals. I mean, they had all these reporters going out, hacking into people's everyday lives, telephone calls, everything else. Rupert Murdoch, considered one of the great media barons of the world and so forth. They had a British commission. They said he was not a fit person. He exhibited willful blindness. There was a lack of good governance. It was part of the culture. Listen to the words. Sounds like the federal sentencing guidelines, doesn't it? This is what's coming back. So hacking is big. 9 months ago, I was down at FBI headquarters, the Hoover building, with Director Mueller and a few of my members. One of my members asks him, what keeps you up late at night? I expected him to say weapons of mass destruction. He comes back and he says cyber threats. One significant cyber threat to the North American power grid will take down the entire global economy. All the lights are out, all the computers are down, all the television's dead, no radios, no nothing. Nothing works. I hope you and your neighbor get along, and I hope somebody has cans of tuna fish and soup in the basement. I mean, really, this is what they're worried about as you go through this thing. This is significant, cyber threats. But also they go further. In addition to looking for places where there are serious cyber threats that are risks to national security and other, they're also going to prosecute for corporate espionage. It's easy for people to say, yeah, I can get market intelligence. Let's do some market research by probing into and hacking into a competitor's system. Well, he says we're going to prosecute. So we need to know what the dangers of this new world of technology. We need to know what the dangers of it. We have a whole generation, Gen Yers, who are coming in. They live on this stuff. They live on this stuff. I don't understand it. I'm too old. My son, who's a vice president at MTV, became enamored when Facebook was going IPO, going public and so forth. He's, Dad, wow, greatest company in the world. You know, fool's gold, don't go there, don't buy it. You know. He said, why? I said, Tim, you're not the customer. You're the inventory. They're selling your information to advertisers, okay? This is, so you have a responsibility for privacy. You've got information on county citizens and everything. These are issues that we have to strive. And you know, we're just catching up. It's kind of like medicine. Medicine technology runs ahead of ethics, medical ethics. And so we have to catch up. You know, we have to assess, you know, what we do in terms of medical tech. Well, same thing's happening in business ethics. This was a couple of years old, the Mississippi one, but it raises a profound question. When is it appropriate for teachers to speak to students, and through what medium? And so how about in the workplace? And should we be speaking to suppliers outside of, you know, the county government's system? You know, should we tell people you're not allowed to do it, or just raise the awareness of what the risks are potential to creating offline relationships that may be deemed to be inappropriate, because someday they may get discovered, and they do at a point in time. Of course, Anthony Weiner, you know, who's out there texting pictures of himself, you know, doing this number back in New York, trying to get back into business. A lot of my members are now going into social media networks before they hire people. They want to see if people have made an ass out of themselves. I mean, think about what the kids are doing today. You go on YouTube and everything else, and they're doing the most ridiculous things in the world. And so this is the new world that we live in and the new risks that we have to deal with. What to think about before you hit the send button. As I said, this is the prosecutor's best friend. So always happy to help. For you, anything. Done for you, big boy. Those are the guys involved in the LIBOR scandal, the banking business, that they were, you know, fixing the LIBOR rates. So it's your turn to make a lot of money. I know you helped me out last time. It's anything for you, big boy. You know, you help me out before I'll help you. The next one, I love this one. These are the rating agencies in New York. It could be structured for cows and we would rate it. You know, this always plays well before a congressional hearing. And then finally, our good friend Fabrice Touré, who's going to go to trial any day now, is I managed to sell a few abacus bonds to widows and orphans. You know, nice going, Fabrice, yeah. But this is, we got to be careful about what we send. Okay, there are risks in it, how we communicate with people. I love this one. I finished a book late last year, The Flight from Conversation, about social media. These little devices that we carry around with us are so powerful, they change not only what we do, but they change who we are. We've become accustomed to being alone together. Have you ever seen two kids sitting on a park bench? You know, and I think they're actually talking to each other. Are you having a good time? Yeah, I'm having a great time. You know, you having a good time? I mean, kids don't communicate the same way. You know, this is a different world. Flying out here from New York the other day, I even saw one kid on the plane talking with one thumb faster than I can even speak. You know, I don't know how they do it. This is a wacky. I got two kids, 34 and 37. If I call and I leave a voicemail, maybe I get an answer back 3 weeks later. If I text them, yeah, Dad, what is it? What is it? You know. It's a different world. She goes on to say, we're alone together. We've gotten used to being a tribe of one, loyal to our own party. Here's the interesting part. Texting, email, and posting lets us present the self we want to be. This means we can edit. Or, if we wish, we can delete or retouch the voice, the flesh, the face, the body. Not too much, not too little, just right. I can online create this other person, this estranged persona. This is who I want you to think of me. Not this one, who's miserable, grew up in a dysfunctional family, and had, you know, a lousy week, whatever it is. I don't want you to know this one. Look at me, I'm smiling. I post very fun pictures of sunsets on this. You know, this is who I think I am. And look, I'm a little thinner, and I, you know, put a little more color in my face. And this is a different generation. The sociological implications we don't know yet. But I do know one thing, that we need to better understand them and where they live, because they live in a different place, certainly than the one that I grew up in. But at the same time, we need to socialize them and mentor them into understanding what we need. And so somewhere in here, we have to learn to meet Gen Y halfway, because this is the future. These are the future leaders. And so we need to understand their world. Fred Rogers got it right, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He knew where kids lived. He was extraordinarily powerful and popular with young kids. They loved him. I thought it was the goofiest show in the world, you know? You know, welcome boys and girls to my neighborhood. You know, he put on the sweater that his mother knitted, his soft shoes, you know. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day. I mean, it's Fred Rogers, right? You know, I didn't get Fred Rogers, okay? But the kids loved him. The kids loved him. You know, he knew where they lived. We have to find out where these kids live. So we have this. 99%ers wake up, so we're all familiar with what happened. We've had the Arab Spring, which literally turned over regimes in Egypt in 30 days. It was incredible. It was called the Twitter Revolution. The Indian Summer was a 74-year-old farmer who went on Gandhi-like hunger strikes to try and get an anti-corruption bill passed in India, which has not passed yet, 2 years later. And then we had the Occupy Wall Street movement. And everybody said, oh, those wacky kids, you know, who the heck are they? 500 cities. I remember it was Gingrich who said, you know, they ought to go out and get a job. That's what they're protesting. There are no jobs. 25% unemployment for young people. There are no jobs. You know, that's what they're mad as hell. Joe Stiglitz, a Nobel Prize winner, says the world is finally rising up and demanding a democracy where people, not dollars, matter. The best money that government can buy just isn't good enough. Crony capitalism. If you want to know what the very top issues in the world, including the United States, it's crony capitalism. It's fat cats who have access to powerful people, get bills passed in support of the things they want in a very narrow, at the expense of all the rest of us. This will continue to be a very major issue as we go forward. When Ambition trial, we had Harvard, the cheating scandal. This is amazing. 125 kids get caught cheating. It was a take-home exam. How hard is that? I could even pass it. I mean, a take-home exam, that's not hard. They're going to consider an honor code now. Boy, that's an interesting idea. We had the Rutgers situation. And again, this is because we got little cameras and devices, people taking pictures. I've been at 2 major universities in the last 2 weeks. Won't mention them by name, major athletic programs. If I mention them, wow, yeah. They said, thank God for us that somebody didn't show up with a camera, you know, one of these little handhelds. Because it could have been them as we go through it. Grand jury indicts 35 in Georgia, cheating scandal. Supervisors and principals are changing the grades. Guilty plea fixing at Baruch. Go on. And of course, let's not forget David Petraeus and other people who have been in the headlines this past year. So, profound loss of trust. Let's go through this. You can't it's not passing another bill. And what we've discovered in the process, and I'm just going to fast forward in here, is that it's really about culture. And we need to understand, look, it's the most powerful influence in every organization, everywhere. A high level of agreement on what's valued and a high level of intensity about those values. And there's great companies, and offline we can talk more about them. There's also a dark side to culture, and you'll get a copy of this presentation, but All the time we're reading in the papers the dark side of culture, how it has negatively affected outcomes and created issues of malfeasance and scandals. Culture trumps compliance. It does every time. And I want to just get to the end here and just share with you some thoughts. Yeah, this is Joe. Acting ethically is everybody's responsibility. In the newsletter that you have, this is what Joe writes. He then writes about your values: integrity, stewardship, and commitment. So integrity comes from the Latin word integer, which means whole or complete. And it really begs the deeper question: what does it mean to be a whole or complete person? What does it mean to know who you are, what it is that you value, and how you live out those values wholly and completely every day? Knowing that we're human, we're going to come up short some days. But we have to, integrity is a very powerful word, but it really asks us to know what it is that we believe in, and then to try and live out those beliefs. Most of us wake up in the morning, we don't even think about our values. You know? But I can tell you, you're making values judgments every hour of every day. You're just doing it because we're presented with trade-offs in the workplace. Stewardship, another great word, comes from the Greek word oikonomia, from which we get the word economics. All right? Stewardship, oikonomia, the steward of the manor. We are the stewards of the manor. I tell my members in business and elsewhere, and we have many state, municipal, federal government members, including the FBI, among others, that we are the stewards, we are the shepherds, we are the moral agents of our organizations. If not us, who? If not now, when? And if not here in San Diego County, who? Who else is going to be responsible for it? Joe can lead this, but all of us must share and partake. Helen talked about character at the beginning of her remarks. It comes from the Greek word character with a K in the middle, which means engraving tool, literally translated. It's as if we are engraved by life's experiences. If you want to know who you are, go back and journey your life and the powerful experiences that have shaped and molded who you are. We have an expression that all of you have heard: life evokes our character. Life evokes our character. That is who you are. We are the sum of all of our experiences. And then Joe also writes in here, integrity is an essential county element. It's the product of ongoing dedication, respect, honesty, candor, and responsibility to always do the right thing the right way. And it means if we expect our co-workers to be good stewards and guardians of public trust, they should expect us to acknowledge, support, and celebrate those efforts. This is who you are. This is where you are. I think you have built a leading edge initiative here through the ethics and compliance functions. But it takes a village. Okay? I always tell my members, you are not in charge of ethics and compliance. Everybody else is. Your job is to help support them, to understand what their requirements are and so forth, and to build something that you're all proud of. And so I'll go back to the opening seal that we had at the beginning when I walked into this room. The highest and most noble thing is public service. You serve. What a wonderful gift. What a great thing to wake up in the morning and to know that what you do contributes to the well-being of this community called the San Diego County. But if you do, and I certainly get up and I'm motivated by the work that I do, otherwise I wouldn't travel all over the world and do the crazy things that I do. But I love trying to be out there, support Joe, support my other members, build anti-corruption initiatives around the world, whatever it is. That's part of our job. So thanks very much. I know you all have to get back to work. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. Thanks.